everyone. Welcome to Workplace Weirdness, the non-HR HR podcast where we dive into the strangest office situations and most awkward workplace dramas. I'm your host, Maya Kadar Kovalsky, and I'm a former chief culture officer and head of people. And I've seen and heard it all and from all sides, so truly no judgments. This is a safe space to get real and explore the cringy, confusing, or chaotic side of office life. So grab your coffee, kick back in your swivel chair, and listen up because Workplace Weirdness is here to give you some much needed perspective. Here's to making the workday a little bit stranger and a whole lot more fun. So, we've got a lot to get to today. We're going to discuss the role of recognition in Gen Z's work life. We're going to get to grips with a jealous boss and decide who will have to lead an awkward conversation about a stinky office. But first, our friend of Workplace Weirdness today is CEO, composer, and superconnector, David Homan. David's impact advisory firm, Orchestrated Connecting, partners with startups, funds, and nonprofits to build new relationships that strategically scale and expand their growth. He connects people around topics ranging from mental health to climate change to art to philanthropy, social justice, and the list goes on. And a fun fact is that David is also a recognized classical composer. You could even ask Siri to play his music. So, without further ado, David, thank you. We're so delighted to have you on Workplace Weirdness today.
Thank you, Maya. I'm pleased to be here and also maybe justify the fact there's a lot of weirdness to me, in addition to whatever illustrious bio you were fed to boost me up a little bit.
And you can add to the bio if there's some weird part that I haven't mentioned. I'd love to know.
Well, then let's dig into that. So, my family loves video games and we love board games. And I am somebody who, in the middle of business meetings, will quote The Simpsons, Futurama, South Park, or Family Guy. And when I get the opportunity, whether it's a workplace retreat, an office party, I will cite what my family has said for years is our pride and joy, which are all of our weird, twisted answers to the game Balderdash, where we come up with fake definitions to real words. And I'll be politically correct for this podcast, but my mom's favorite forever is a word called wonky, which is a real word. You could ask Siri or Alexa to define it for you. But her definition was the word that comes before Toogie. And my brother had a famous movie called Summer in Ontario. And the fake definition for that movie was Sandra Bullock stars as a piece of Canadian bacon. And
And people
so,
fell for it.
people fell for it. I live to be eccentric and to really connect to people and realize that there's a work hat, there's a personal hat, and in the end, everyone's just one person. It's the persona we choose to bring about. And as a CEO, former CEO of a global nonprofit, I learned really quickly unless you brought people along to your personality, you didn't bring out theirs. And when you brought out theirs with you, that comfort would let you then deal with more difficult situations. Maybe not stinky office, but maybe things a little bit below that in the pedigree.
So, why don't you help us clarify what the term superconnector means and how does it connect to your you have a whole thing about just honoring the chain of connections in general. What does that mean?
So I'll dissect that a little bit to give the sequence. So, what I'd ask everyone to think about is the job you got, the business deal you got, the opportunity presented. Think about how many of those opportunities came because somebody introduced you to somebody else. Somebody got you to the right party. Somebody got you to something that then mattered in your life. And therefore, I believe that what's sacrosanct but not necessarily valued is the power of the introduction. And so a connector is anyone who looks at somebody and their need, has empathy, has curiosity, and looks at where somebody that they know they could introduce to somebody else and provide strong, powerful relationships. And so a connector is anyone who can do that. You could run a PTA, you could be the head of HR, you could be a vice president, or you could simply be the secretary who greets everyone when somebody walks into the room. But if you know two people are both passionate about something and you connect them, you add value in a way that we need to value more. So that's what I learned by running a nonprofit, by fundraising in arts and culture. But then I realized that there were certain people who did this at an incredibly high scale, people who could dominate connections and connectivity in a variety of industries, geographies. I grew up as a fourth tier jock in Florida, yet I have connections to former NFL Super Bowl champs, former major, US Olympic gymnasts and tennis stars. And it's because of the network that I've built, not because I played those sports or excelled in any way. I was far from that as an athlete. But that's just one area: getting into Hollywood, getting into business, getting into philanthropy, having friends in Perth, Australia, and Adelaide, which are two cities in Australia most Americans wouldn't even know. It's always just Melbourne or Sydney. And so, as a super connector, I've been passionate about finding other super connectors, looking at a value system that helps the relationship be what moves things forward, but moves it forward at the speed of trust.
Wow, I love that. That's beautiful. So, were you ever not able to make a connection with someone? Were you ever in a situation where it was hard to converse with somebody?
Yeah, for the majority of my life. I might be polished now in how I speak and what I've done, and part of that comes from my acting training and having a theater director academic father, but I was a socially awkward kid. I got sick when I was in sixth grade and became very socially awkward. I never felt I fit in most places. I wasn't an extrovert as people feel I am now. I was an introvert. Then I became what I now believe is a great term, which is an empathic extrovert. And I realized that when I find connection and I feel heard by helping other people be heard, I'm able to develop depth in an authentic way. And in doing that, I no longer am that shy little kid that I still feel deep inside is also me.
And then since you were a former introvert, do you ever still find that you need those moments of quiet, those stillness moments?
Beyond what I get the time for, with two small children, launching several businesses, and dealing with the costs of New York. But yes, I believe that. So, as a composer, which is why I call my world orchestrated connecting, I'm a trained pianist and composer and actor. I'm an artist who failed as an artist in some degrees, but excelled in others, which is why when you say to this entire group listening on this podcast, yes, you could ask for Siri or Alexa to play my music, the point is, people don't. They're happy enough to just know I'm a composer. They don't take the step to listen. And that's the reality of it. But every piece I've done that's had profound impact, people didn't stand up after the premiere of my works and give me a standing ovation. They sat there in silence in some sort of inner journey that, moments or sometimes 20, 30 seconds after a piece ended, then that silence they realized was full with the depth I brought to them. And so I have to balance my life in terms of that cacophony of people, interaction, endless Zoom calls, events with the same silence to be able to rebalance and rehear myself.
Ooh, beautifully said. And I happen to love the metaphor of orchestrating or composing and using that instead of for music, but to bring people together. Like there's something gorgeous about that idea that like networking, which is sort of like this, I don't know, this word that's overused and it's a little yucky. Um, but when you talk about it as orchestrated connecting, it's about making those connections and sort of also navigating them like in a sort of artful, beautiful way. So I like that name very much for that reason.
Thank you. Well, it's why I trademarked it now.
Ah,
Um, but the thing I'd say is what it really does is it's not just about connecting. Oh yeah, you and I connected, right? It's about the intentionality of it. And that's what I've realized as more people when they're around me or they meet me then use that term. Because then when you do it, if you do it with a purpose, you have a greater outcome.
Well, we call this podcast Workplace Weirdness. And I know that you've been in different kinds of workplaces. So I'd love to ask you if you can think of your weirdest workplace moment. It could be an awkward conversation, sort of an embarrassing moment. It could be something that you learned. What's your workplace weirdness?
I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. So, nonprofit I was with had brought on this intern for 2 months. Great individual. They did great work, planned something out that was big for us. And I thought, okay, like demonstrated value. I have a part time position. I'm going to bring this person onto the team. We'd spent several months getting to know each other, hired them, and then a month passed. And this person came to me and they said, "I'd like business cards." I said, "Okay, but I wanted to be like polite about it, but I was like, "But you're an intern. You've been here for a month in any official capacity. Like, I don't spend my day handing out business cards. I barely use them. Like, what do you want business cards for? Who are you going to meet? What are you doing?" And the person looked at me and they're like, "Well, I've been here a month." And I look back and I go, "Yes, you've been here a month." And they go, "Yes, I've been here a month." And I go, "I know you've been here a month." And we're saying the same thing with two completely different understandings of what it meant. Because in their world, a month was okay, they've been here a month. Well, mine, I've already repeated it several times. I was flabbergasted. I didn't know what to say because I didn't want to demean the person or the work that they'd done. But if you're an outward facing individual with an organization, especially at the tier of what I was running at the time, like you got to really put in your stripes and your time in order to be the type of public facing voice. And it was this wonderfully awkward conversation with no conclusion except for I was not able to value the person the way that they wanted. And in the end, their workload immediately diminished because of it. And in the end, they were only there one more month.
I guess they never got the business cards.
Actually, we had ordered the business cards, and a week after they quit, they arrived. And so
Got it.
it became small little notes that we wrote on the back of.
That's so funny. That's so funny. And yeah, it definitely speaks to, I like the way you put it, the values placed on the amount of time that it takes to get somewhere. It's different for different people and generally.
And look, different generations have a different standard of what the amount of work is to justify it, what your tenure has been or your skill set. But generally, if you have very little skills and you are developing them, and you move very quickly from testing to testing in a more official capacity, that's maybe not the time to push, but it was the time to push. And then the pushing went a different direction than planned.
Exactly. And it also has to do, for me, it has to do with a little bit of like humility as well. I mean, I just like to point out that, coming into a new place, you sort of have to learn the ropes a little bit more, I think, before feeling so at home. But anyway, that's my 2 cents there. But we'll put that aside for now. That's wonderful. Great story. I thank you for sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
And now, the Week in Work, a weekly section where we discuss a news story that could affect how we work. So, a news story last month revealed that Gen Z receives more recognition at work than their elders, but they want even more. 49% of Gen Zers said they receive recognition at work once a week or more. That's compared to 37% of millennials, 24% of Gen X, and 15% of boomers. But 83% of Gen Zers still want more recognition. The reality is that recognition isn't the same as meaningful appreciation, says an HR expert, meaning a good job badge on Slack doesn't translate into raises or promotions. If employers don't start aligning their recognition of achievement with tangible outcomes, will they lose this generation? Or will Gen Z simply have to get used to it? So that's the question. And David, I know you wrote an article in Forbes about recognition and being a change agent. I'm wondering if you can relate back what you wrote about recognition and the difference between recognition and appreciation and give us some insights.
I mean, you're going to date me back for that article from when Gen Z wasn't employed. So those are the gray hairs that have evident but hide in my otherwise dense Jufro. So here's what I'd say, right? So to be a change agent, right, is to change the strategy, the direction, the culture, who's working with you to create a greater outcome and goal. And in every change, people are satisfied, people are upset, and everyone wants recognition for what they've done because they feel insecure or under threat that they may not have their jobs, they may not have the same responsibilities, or they won't be adaptable. So, as a leader of an organization, I had to learn to pay particular attention to the psychology of each of the people who worked with me or who I worked for, since I had a large board of directors. And as I tried to figure out that change, it became clear lines got drawn. And a line was drawn because of perception, not reality, which is why the adaptability to be a change agent was to ask with curiosity and empathy rather than tell what should be. And I've found that everyone I've worked with, including two of my staff who are Gen Z, that in the cases where one needs recognition, it means one is seeking validity. And when one is seeking validity, what one is attempting to do is to constantly gain something that actually needs to be taught by leadership. I do not need, with the community and the network that I've done, any more accolades that I run great events or I just ran a great conference. I don't need anything. I don't need anyone to tell me that I was eloquent on a podcast. It doesn't matter to me. But that's because I've spent a lot of my career having people criticize me, attack me, ridicule me, in some cases want to fire me for what I was doing. But once I asked with curiosity what they would do and I got them to understand that what they would do, I had done, and I was on to the next step even above what they would do. And this is how I successfully led my nonprofit, successfully built my own business. Every part of it was asking with curiosity if somebody could help me see and that they what they needed from their own shoes and perspective, and then to have them see my vision as an amplification of having heard theirs. And so when I think about this in terms of these statistics, it's all generational differences. Oldest of those generations grew up in an environment where you did what you had to do. And hand holding wasn't part of it. It was a much tougher generation in that way. And every stat you gave me, Maya, after that shows that we are constantly seeking more and more of that validity because of our uncertainty in what our output is or our value. And that's because everything comes down to a culture of trust. If you can create the trust of the larger outcome and everyone sees their part, then no generation needs their recognition for it. They have it based on the outcome. If groups need to be quote unquote coddled or groups need that recognition, it's because, in my opinion, they don't see the value that they're adding or they don't feel like they're part of that larger voice. But the challenge that has happened a lot in the workplace with these younger generations is that they don't necessarily jive with the approach of the older generations because there are two different ways to come to the same result. One is get to the outcome. The other is get to the why of the outcome and get to the outcome. And I believe that in HR, in management, in leadership, it's incumbent upon us now to get everyone to ask with curiosity towards the why, but understand they are part of it until they're ready to lead it. And once they choose not to lead it, then they actually follow in a way that is substantial and adds value to a company, to a culture. But now we have to get over that hurdle of having to prove the value we need people to give. Whereas I believe previous generations didn't need that proof. They were educated, their society was different. They just did it because they were told.
Or maybe their internal voice was stronger in some way. In other words, because maybe they weren't, I like what you said, they weren't recognized and praised as much maybe as children. So they had to develop their own self-praise or their own systems in order to handle not being praised or being criticized, etc. But I think it's pretty amazing that you in your own journeys are saying that you basically gained more from criticism in certain cases or feedback that wasn't as positive in order to form your I don't know your strength, I guess.
Let's say we're both sitting in the same room and we take a little like walled up ball of paper and you throw it the first time into the basket and you think, okay, I can throw a ball into the basket. I do it, I miss, I miss, I miss. And after 50 tries, now I can do it every time. But you believe you can do it once and the next 50 tries, guess what? You lost the bet, whatever we bet. Um, I believe that you only learn from the mistakes that you've made, and you only learn from the criticism that you've made, not just to learn about what you did wrong, but how you reacted to what you did wrong. And more importantly than that, how you react to people who make you feel wronged or triggered or judged. And in leadership, what you learn is you always have to look at the other perspective before you react. And that filter of having that slight pause makes one a great leader or not. In any culture, and somebody like you who focuses on the culture, it's all about creating the safe space where people who are not as adept as often leaders can be to react can react and then it can be managed. But in many cases, too, a lot of leaders suck. They're horrible people. They can't manage, they trample over people. And it's because they don't embody the skills that I think are necessary for everyone in this case, which one has to learn, which is how to be curious, how to have empathy, how to understand the importance of generosity and gratitude. These are not things taught, but they're four of the five pillars in my world of what makes culture. The fifth one, just to add to it, is actually diversity. You have to seek it out. Different opinions, different people. But this idea that, think about how many times, and I'd challenge everyone listening to this, you've been in a conversation with you asked a lot of questions, and the person asked nothing of you.
I feel like that's a lot of dates.
It's a lot of dates, right? I mean, just about when I use this analogy, when I'm trying to teach people this, I go, "Listen, remember that first date you went on with the most gorgeous, incredible person you've ever met? And you talked about yourself the whole time, and you felt so heard and so appreciated, and then why didn't they call you back? Because you learned nothing about them." So unless we approach with curiosity and empathy in every interaction, we've failed. And for anyone who is whatever generation that needs that instant recognition, the question would be, are you approaching with any curiosity or empathy the person who you're asking that from? Or you just need it to justify yourself? Because if you need something to justify yourself, what is it feeding? It's feeding an emptiness, which means that's your self work to do. But if you are managing in a way that doesn't create part of a team effort, that doesn't make people's voices feel heard, that doesn't create a stronger culture through every adverse situation, then you as a leader or a manager have messed up exactly the same because you had no empathy, no curiosity for what your team was going through to get to the adverse outcome, the mistake. And only in between do we keep that idea that it's one person, it's not a workplace person, and then a person who leaves and now they're not a worker. Everyone is human. Everyone has a bad day. Everyone has a crappy situation. And in most cases in this world where I've acted like an a-hole to people, somebody showed up late once. You don't show up late when you meet me. Their mom died. Another case, somebody was late and it would seem like a small thing, but they hit a squirrel and their son was really upset. And in all the cases where I would react as if something had happened to me, I eventually learned through those mistakes, how dare I assume ever that what I'm feeling is more important than what somebody else is going through unless I know what they're going through. And only when we have that type of interaction with each other do we mitigate all the crap that comes out, especially in a workplace where people don't like each other when honestly they could probably be the best of friends if they got past themselves in order to do so.
I mean, I think first of all, thank you for sharing and being vulnerable with your own mistakes because I think that's how people learn that other people also can be fast to judgment, for instance. But absolutely, I think that you're absolutely right that, you always have to hold a space for that empathy. I like to call it humility, but I'm not sure if that's a word that resonates for other people. Just remember that you just don't always know what baggage that other person is carrying until Exactly. Until you have the interaction, you hear from them. And beautifully said. I feel like you solved this issue for all of Gen Z. Wonderful. I can just tell, we'll get back to Newsweek, let them know that it's about asking, being curious and asking questions and making sure that the younger people within the workforce are understanding what it entails to be recognized, but also are they recognizing back? So I feel like that's it. We finished that issue. That's easy. So now we're going to take a very quick little break. When we come back, we have questions for you about a jealous boss, a question from a no nonsense, no small talk listener, and an office's rather awkward smell. All right. So see you in a few minutes. Welcome back to Workplace Weirdness. I'm here with David Homan, the superconnector and CEO of Orchestrated Connecting. David, we have a few questions around workplace relationships for you. We know you have experience in the arts. This person works in theater and has a boundary problem with their boss. So, the first listener question is this: Dear Workplace Weirdness, my boss is really jealous of other people's relationships within the office. I work in a creative organization with a lot of people who leave when the production season ends, so building longer term relationships at work means a lot to me. One new long term hire keeps telling me about her new girlfriend. I enjoy our conversations, but I'm afraid if she keeps talking so much to me, my boss will come down on me in some weird way. My boss is very charismatic, so when she loves you, it's wonderful and inspiring. But when she isn't the focus of all conversations, it gets awkward and our encounters become tense. How can I form connections without alienating my boss?
So, a great friend of mine years ago was in a conversation and said, you don't go to fun, you go to work." And if you're in a situation, given the blurring and the way people communicate now, and somebody is having more fun and sharing and bonding in the workplace, then it's an easy choice. Take it out of the workplace or say you can't hear it at the workplace, because we're not going to solve the psychology of a jealous boss, a nosy boss. Nothing's going to change that person. I don't believe people change, so therefore I don't have any advice on how to navigate it better or the words to say to your boss. Oh no, we're just gaining more depth of how we know it. Everything's going to feed into the same insecurity this leader represents. So in the end, the world is based on compliments. Dear person who has a great girlfriend who's telling me about them, I love how enthusiastic you are about this relationship. It brightens my day every single day. In fact, it's brightened my day so much, I don't need to hear about it at all until after 5 o'clock. But if you'd like to tell me after that, please do. Just flatter and push away, because if it's going to cause a sticky situation or one where the boss comes down on you because of jealousy or whatever other need is there, it's just not necessary during the workday or whatever environment this creative group works.
You may be right, but I had a completely different reaction. I just got
Oh, good. Tell me.
Mine was gonna be, but you know what? It's funny because now I feel like I sound like exactly the person that you just said. Like I'm gonna live my life, and I can't make do with the fact that the if the boss is has their own uh situation that they're dealing with or their own issues. I still think that relationships in the office are so important. I do like what you said though about like trying to create more boundaries around that relationship. Like maybe let's talk, after work hours or whatever, but absolutely, I'm not gonna put up with a boss telling me or dictating to me who I can be friends with at the office or not. In fact, what I would try to do, and again, maybe I'm delusional in thinking I'm going to change this person, but I would try to focus in on the fact that I'm making connections so I can get more done for you. Like I try to work the angle of like, well, the more people I know in the office, the more things I can get done, and the more the more efficiency we'll have. I mean, again, I wouldn't necessarily say it in these words, but that would be the vibe I would be trying to create. You might be right though. Maybe this person, this boss person, is so set in their ways that they wouldn't see it for what that is. But then I feel like then that's a choice to make. Maybe it's not the right place for me. But if you do this, by the way, if you take my advice, have to know that you are going to be alienating the boss in some way, and you just have to I guess my take is live your life. I can't change myself for the boss.
Yeah, so Maya, I totally hear you. I don't disagree, but I don't agree for this reason, because the question isn't about another peer in the workplace who's jealous about the relationship. It's about somebody where the pecking order means they make decisions around your value, your time, your livelihood, or the other person's. And if their, I'll call it pettiness, around a relationship is petty because it's not affecting the work output, it's simply just something where the term was jealous, then I don't believe you can change people. I don't think you can make somebody less jealous, have less envy. Those come from a place where nobody is going to be able to help that person. And probably the people who have tried, if this person is senior enough to have that position, they've given up because that person doesn't want to change. And therefore, that boss is making a choice to act that way around her employees in this case.
I think you've actually turned me around because you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I think my reaction is more on if it was a colleague, but you're absolutely right. If it's the boss and maybe even the main boss, in other words, not just a manager or person on the executive team, but maybe the founder, it's even harder, I guess, to you're not going to change them. You kind of have to meet them where they're at, and that's the culture of this space of this office. And again, then it just happens to be like, how long can you stay at a culture that might not exactly meet your goals or the way that you want to act in life. But certainly I think I like your suggestion of how to deal with this other colleague. That's very good too, is telling them, I just think that for the both of us, actually, you're almost saving them as well. Let's make this more professional and we can have our fun time after work.
There's a lot of situations where if you don't know what's happening on the other side, again, if you didn't have that curiosity, so if something is happening in an adverse way and you're able with the relationship one has with your boss to ask with curiosity or to share something, I led an organization for years where very few people I work with ever asked how I was. They knew around a board meeting or a gala, but I would go into meetings and be absolutely humiliated because I wasn't a 70-year-old extremely rich donor. And I would be talked down to, my physical appearance would be criticized, my value systems would be challenged. Then I walk into an environment where I had to be the leader. I just wanted to go sit in my office. Go back to your question around silence. I just wanted to silence. And I had one employee, his name is Megan. Oh, she was the best. She knew. She could read it on my face. She would ask me. She would know when to ignore it and when just to move through it or talk to me about a Broadway show she was involved with. And my strongest work relationship was somebody for when I was not being the boss. We were just peers. And then we would switch it back, but that was developed from both sides. So there are ways, but again, it depends on the person.
First of all, love the fact that we can disagree and then come to agreement. That's really, really important. And also, at the end of the day, these kinds of relationships are what make you either stay at work or not, or move on to a different place. So, absolutely developing the curiosity, if you can, just depending on the context of the situation with this boss figure, I think could also help them, like you say, open up and maybe allow for more fraternizing, if you will, within the workplace, if they believe that they are sort of in on it, or if it's not something that's exclusionary to them. Interesting take, and I really appreciate your input there. So let's hope that listener will find some balance and a way forward. Next up, we have a somebody who called in. It's a no nonsense boss who's trying to avoid small talk.
You know, what's really interesting in this case is that the person who, really vulnerably put this out and put them out with voice on this calling in for you was completely conscious of the challenge, which itself is incredible. Everything for me comes down to context. If I was this individual and I knew that I had a time and place for this, but when I started my Monday morning, I didn't want the ramp up, I wanted the dig in, then I just make it clear. Listen, it's not that I don't respect any or all of you, or I'm totally fine with all of you here engaging in like chatter to start your day. I want to clear my inbox and have an understanding of my week, and then I'd like to come out. Maybe that'll become 10:30. Let's talk about our weekends. You could create a structure that then lets people do a ramp up. In many cases, people just want to do the small talk because they don't want to start on a Monday and they don't want to dig into it, or they have a project that they're dreading, or something happened over the weekend that they haven't really socialized because it's just been them and their kid in a soccer game and their kid got hurt, and like they're looking for a connection, and people are going to be looking in many different ways. But if you're leading a group, if you're managing a group, it's up for you to say what the culture is that you accept and what the framing is for which you want that interaction to be allowed. And so if this individual doesn't care other people do small talk, just own it. Hey, I'm not a curmudgeon bastard. I just want to clear my inbox. Let's talk at 10:30. And like leave that staff meeting, say every Monday, for like the first 10 minutes, bitch about your lives. Everyone has to share something. The other way I'd say it, and because I've worked with or I engage with a lot of people that for all pretenses appear to be this way, I call this fishing with vulnerability. And the minute that you share things that have depth, it's no longer small talk. For me, Maya, my 10-year-old has now spent 2 times this week for 4 hours each looking at middle schools. And the process living in New York of getting a kid into a middle school or figuring out where she could go for public and the cost of that and the terror of that in my life are so stressful. I'm having a really hard time managing my balance, and the real hardship is she's having a hard time managing hers in school. And I'm spending so much of my time trying to keep my kid a kid when this process is making her feel like she has to grow up really quickly. How was your weekend?
Well, after that, you can't not answer either.
Yeah, and you don't have to, right?
Mine was much lighter than that, I guess. I actually the funny thing is that I'm not so good at small talk either, but I think that there's something I like about the fishing with vulnerability. I think I go in with good intent into the conversation and hope that the other person will either give me something like what you just gave me, like some sort of insight into their lives, and then of course I can follow up with either a story or, you know, a validation, I guess, of like how they're feeling. But it is about that bravery of that moment of like how to just start and be present for that. Back to our listener though, I totally dig the fact that, different people have different styles. And if he's into starting his week without the small talk, I think I think you said it as well, as long as he sort of frames it for his staff that way, that's just the way I am. And so that they don't feel hurt by his shortness. I think that that's going to get them a very long way. That's going to get him a very long way. More than that, I certainly believe that when you're coming into an office space, like if you have a shared space and people are having sort of water cooler talk, hallway talk, banter, that kind of thing, that's okay. I think that if you move through that space quietly. I think where it does get to be a little bit more offensive is when you're in a one-on-one situation. So if he does have an early meeting, like I would say that one-on-one, if there's a meeting, let's say you and I scheduled to talk about something work-wise, it is nice to start with just a check-in. And I hope that I got the impression that that's not what he was talking about. That he was talking more about that weekly big sort of meeting or something where it's just even talking even before he gets into his office workplace, and people are just wanting to almost strip him of his energy. He's coming in with a certain intent and energy to work, and he doesn't want to be he doesn't want to be he doesn't want his focus taken away. So that's where I go with that. Beyond that, I also think that if he's the boss, which I wasn't sure of, I guess he is the boss, I think, then it is very nice to start in a humane way. I mean, it sometimes is a thing that I would advise people to do, in the sense of like just trying to check in with people. But if it's fake or if it's not authentic, people will see through it. So, like you said, finding the right time to do that check in would be key. But doing it at some point would be important. It doesn't have to be right first thing in the morning. Nowadays, some offices have this thing where I think it's called like a "This Is Me" worksheet, where people first come in, especially executives and whatnot. They fill out like, these are like the quirks about me. These are the things you need to know about me. So that would be the kind of thing that I'd fill it out. Like, I am not a morning, schmoozer. I don't like to have conversations early in the day. I like to get my work done. Talk to me I like what you said, at 10:30, at 2 p.m., whatever it is. I think that might be the way to frame it and to then go into this with more, with a positive intent, but also not change the authenticity of who you are coming into the space. So that's my take.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing it.
So, last one. This is our last, what we call our cringeworthy weirdness. So, every week we cover one question addressing the kind of cringeworthy experience that can haunt our sleepless nights. This one is particularly cringy. David, someone will have to have a very awkward conversation. But the question is who? So here we go. Dear Workplace Weirdness. In my workplace, there's a younger guy on the team, and his office smells like teenage testosterone, like the boys' locker. It's almost choking. But who can say that? We are small and do not have an HR company. It's literally a bare bones startup staff. Whose job is it to handle this and how? So, do you want my take first or do you want to go first?
Oh, no, let's do your take first.
I'm all into the radical candor. I think it's something that, somebody has to tell him. Somebody's got to tell that kid, the thing that everybody else knows. It's actually even like, it could be very sort of demeaning for the rest of the office if everybody knows something about you, but no one's was sort of brave enough to say. Who should talk to him? My take, and I'd love to hear your feedback here, David, is if he is male and in his 20s, if there is somebody else like who is a manager that's also a guy, that could be like the way to handle it. Like somebody who is in a similar-ish demographic, doesn't have to be the same profile exactly, but more helpful like for a woman to hear it from a woman and a man to hear it from a man when it comes to sort of hygiene issues, in my opinion. And to go in with a script, you can sort of need to feel out the person. But I've also heard stories of people coming in and being like, in this particular case, there's no HR person. So it's not like somebody has to do it in a sort of very crafted way. Somebody could say, hey, dude, just want to let you not smelling so great in here. Want to try some deodorant or something like that. Like, I mean, and there's a way of saying it. That's one thing. Another thought that I had also, and this is something that I actually did do way back when, not that we had a specific person who was smelly, but I made sure that the bathrooms in our office were outfitted with a little bit of hygienic things. So you had a little bit of toothpaste and toothbrush in case you needed it, mouthwash, and also some deodorant spray so that it could be shared. And as much as it's like kind of saying it without saying it was that was my sort of philosophy. So that would be another approach. But if you really want to get the message through to this person, someone's going to have the talk with him. And if there is somebody who's sort of similar in demographic, I think that could work the best. And if not, the boss. I mean, somebody has to take ownership. So, what do you think?
I agree with you. I think in a smelly situation in particular, we'll use this for a tagline: candor is better than rancor. But I think in the end, it's the person who can handle it with humor. It may be a peer, it may not. But I think in a situation where something that is challenging can be made light of, in the end, the only way to change the situation is to make light of it. So if it had to be me, boss or not, I'd walk in. Let's just say this person's name is, I don't know, Mike. Be like, Mike, I lost the bet. Mike goes, what bet? And you're like, well, I'm supposed to come in here. I'm supposed to talk about how we need to change the degree of the situation. And we need to bring in, maybe a magician with a dove. And we need to get to the essence, like the herbal essence of the situation. And maybe instead of old school, we should deal with this with Old Spice. And Mike will be like, what are you talking about? And then, go, listen, like, Mike, we don't care how you handle this, whether you're going to act the situation, whether you're going to do it all natural and just reapply every 30 minutes. But we know that what you do is incredible. We just don't want to know it from 30 feet away. And collectively, I lost the bet to tell you, we think what you do is incredible. We just want you to be able to tell us a little bit closer, and we're not sure what's going on or if you need help, but we're happy to donate anything that you need to change the fact that this office stinks. It smells like a locker room, and none of us play sports. And like, if you handle it that way, will the person be upset? Of course. Everyone's upset the minute they're criticized about anything they could have done wrong. and we react like we would as kids feeling under attack.
But you know what? I would use my spinach trick. You know, when somebody has a piece of spinach stuck in their teeth, I like to say the sentence, "Can I be a friend for a second?" Like, I want to be a good friend, and I just don't want to let you walk around with essentially spinach in your teeth and nobody telling you. And that's the same thing as this smelly situation. Let me just be a friend and let you know that I think, you need to remedy the smell situation. Like, there's a way to say it in a way that hopefully is not demeaning, is like talking heart to heart and just telling you like you're gonna do better with everybody on this team if they feel comfortable around you.
And it's that simple, Maya.
I know. It's just so
Because
hard.
it's just so hard, right?
But I love the humor you just infused. I mean, I honestly think that the reason why I was laughing so much is because you're never really gonna do that, David. You're never really gonna go in and say every pun of every,
No, no, no. But
deodorant in the world.
I had an employee, and this employee would go to the bathroom in the afternoon every day. They'd take a while. And when they'd come back, they smelled like they'd take a while. So I had to say to them, listen, I'm not going to change what you eat or how long you take, but I'm going to ask you to get some fresh air before you come back in here.
Ooh. Hmm.
I had to. It wasn't tenable. It wasn't good, right? And it's like, it smells a sense that is so triggering and so off-putting, the rest of your senses go away when that sense goes awry. And if personal hygiene isn't something people get, it's because everyone else on the planet avoided telling this person. Eventually, somebody has to. And in this case, it has to be you, has to be me.
How did he take it?
Not well. No one takes these things well. The idea you could walk.
I guess we should say to the listener, expect it not to necessarily go well, but it might be effective despite the fact that the person might get hurt or something like that for the short run, that is.
But if you're not diminishing the person, you're commenting on the situation. Eventually, if they have any maturity, then they will handle it and move on from it and start making their own jokes or have like 15,
Right.
potpourris or perfumes, like a Macy's thing, like sitting on their desk as a way to do it. And if they don't have a sense of humor and they don't take it well and they smell, do you want to work with them?
Any way you slice it, it stinks. So,
It's true.
yep. Anyway, I think that's our show, David. Thank you so much for coming on. I want to say, you shared your superpowers of a connection and relationship building. You've had some quite insightful responses to these listener questions and also sort of gave us a spin on how to think about recognition and just the values that people put on recognition within the workplace. And in general, you've really given me some more to think about. So, what a nice, fun time that I've had with you today. Today's show is produced by me, Maya Kadar Kovalsky, and Felicia Wang, and written by Dana Burnell. Thanks to Billy Salibi, Sam Davidson, and the rest of the team at Podify who helped ideate and engineer this episode. Thanks also to David Homan for joining us on today's episode. And thanks to you for listening to Workplace Weirdness. Make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back next week for another breakdown of all things weird from a workplace near you.
Thank you for having me.